Hey, it's Curly, and set 7 Moonfangs and Cerulean Blaze comes out today in English, and with the release of this set, Lyrical Monestario finally gets their own soul front. So today, let's find out whether or not your lyrical deck needs to play this card. So first things first, before we get into Lyrical Monestario, I want to go over my previous video. We can check out somewhere the link to that, where with the release of set 6, I went over the original first 5 nations and went over whether or not they needed to use their soul fronts, right? So I wanted to sort of recap on that and maybe make some updates, and then we can go into Lyrical Monestario. So starting here with Dragon Empire, these were the decks that I had listed that you could consider to play these soul fronts. Today I'm also going to be adding an additional tier for each nation, which is which basically means I guess you can make an argument for, but you can more than definitely do without it, right? Whereas like the actual nation tier is one where it would be a good inclusion. As usual, these are just suggestions and opinions, not facts, even though my opinions are, you know, always correct, so they can be treated as fact. But these are mine and mine opinions alone. So this is what I had said last time, and I think for the most part, this generally stays the same aside from maybe Alcalibra. So I felt the same way with Alcalibra, especially after, you know, seeing some of the comments you guys left. Alcalibra's kind of, I feel like it generates its own soul, and you probably would rather play a different type of trigger in that slot. And that's something that I feel like I didn't emphasize enough in the previous video, is that while some decks may need soul, which means they could play the soul fronts to fill up their soul that way, that doesn't mean that necessarily that deck wants to play fronts, right? Or even specifically they don't want to play the shield fronts instead, right? So that is something to keep in mind. A type of trigger is not just the fact that they need soul, where I feel like Alcalibra just generates its own soul. In addition to that, we have a couple of other Dragon Empire decks here. Some of them new, based on some stuff that we've seen in Festival Collection or in like set 8 that's released in Japan. So we have ourselves Gigantic Overlord the N, Dolde, which has changed, you know, kind of drastically, has gotten a new lease on life thanks to the Skyride promo that comes out in Volume 3, which we in English should probably be getting in like October, November. That said, it doesn't really change anything for the deck. Then for these two guys here, these 3 guys, I guess you can say, you can move them up here to this tier. Warbell is a new deck that's in set 8 that I actually really like. Unfortunately, I don't think it's actually seeing any play right now in Japan, so it's kind of hard to see whether or not they're playing soul fronts in their list or not. But he does have, you know, cards that soul blast in the list. So there's the grade 1 Restander that uses soul. There's of course Warbell itself, but it, you know, soul blast its own copy. And then you can also play a lot of orders with this deck, so it allows you to play the Latefa, which is the Tetrafold clone for Dragon Empire. So you do have, you know, the capability to play soul or to use soul in this deck. So I can maybe make an argument for it, but I haven't actually tested it myself. It's kind of the same thing here for Varilla. Varilla plays normal orders, which means, again, Latefa is really usable. But I feel like it's not really super necessary. You probably want draws in this deck instead. Triumph Dragon is one that I've actually been messing around with a lot recently. All of the quick start decks got a wave of support. They're getting another one in Festival Collection, but as the point of recording this, that hasn't been revealed. And they got one in set 7 that I've actually been testing out a lot, and I'll have a video coming out soon discussing that. But I actually feel like you actually want to play soul front in this possibly, just because of the fact that the deck can actually draw a lot of cards now, so you don't really need to play draws. And also you can use a lot of soul in a lot of different ways, but this is all kind of dependent, the build I have is dependent on Blazing Warcry existing in English, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. That's Dragon Empire. Let's go ahead and move down here to Dark States. Generally, I think Dark States stays about the same. We're going to go ahead and take these guys that we are no longer considering. Oh, Vermilion. Yeah, Vermilion was one of those also that was in the comments, and someone had mentioned. They gave me flack for it, and I was going to uninclude it out of spite, but I think it's fine. I think you can play it in this deck, because there are some things that use soul, but I feel like... Actually, you know what? No, I will take it out of spite, actually, because you have While you have stuff like the Phoenix that uses soul and the blood itself uses soul, you have the I'm pretty sure, what is it called? Velocity Dragon. I'm pretty sure that puts a card in hand to soul to like draw two. So I think you'll be fine without that. Then we have here Dark States. Time Stamping Dragon was another one that was mentioned in the comments. I don't really think this will see any play with the Soul Fronts. I don't think it's really necessary. Vladimir Nexus is a brand new deck that's come out in set 8, but I haven't seen any lists that were playing the Soul Fronts. I don't really see the need to play Soul Fronts. To be honest, you probably want the Shield instead, especially because you're playing extra grade 3s in the deck now. Sarah is a new promo boss for Dark States, but likewise, I don't think you want to play the Soul Fronts for these specifically. She doesn't need specifically cards in Soul. She needs probably just orders in Soul. That's kind of really what she wants to have in Soul. And then Liel Armorda, I keep trying to say Armorda. Odium is a bit of a tricky one because I've seen a few lists that actually use these Soul Fronts, but the vast majority of them do not. So I'll leave it here and because I guess it's plausible and I can maybe understand why. We're gonna take these guys. We're gonna throw them down here real quick. There we go. And then we're gonna go ahead and talk about Keter Sanctuary, which doesn't change drastically because we don't have too many to go over. I feel like Ezel and Mortaline are two things that I missed out on last time in the previous video because of the fact that Ezel does have the Din Drain that uses a lot of soul, as well as a couple of other cards, including Ezel himself. I think you can probably make a good argument for using the Soul Fronts in his deck. And Mortaline is a deck that uses a lot of soul itself, even though it does have one rear guard that puts a whole column into soul. The Soul Fronts might make your life a little bit easier. Youthberg here is something that I don't think actually uses soul, but it's kind of tough to tell because of the nature of Youthberg right now in set 8. And, you know, it's not really being solved and not a lot of people knowing how to play the deck. I have here both versions of Raziel because in Japan they do have the restriction where this deck can no longer use Vita and, or is it the original one? Yeah, I think you can't use the original one with Saragon. So it's possible that we might see a split in list where maybe they'll play one Raziel and the other one plays the other ones. Who knows? And that means that maybe one of them will use like Painkiller, which means they might need Soul, but I don't really think that's going to be the case. I just kind of wanted to bring that up. Houndriser, I feel like you can make a really good argument for using the Soul Fronts because the Vanguard itself is Soul Blast 2, and also you have some other units that use Soul. And you can also play the Pride or Gay Cyclers in this, so I can see that happening. Alfred, I'll put here in I haven't really tested Alfred myself. I've seen other people test it, and Alfred is sort of really counterblast heavy. And in order to sort of deal with that, you have counter charges that most of them use Soul. So you might end up having to use that in this deck. But who knows right now. With that, we'll go over to Brandt Gate, who I feel like relatively stays the same, but there are two that I didn't mention before that I did want to mention right now. Sorry for scrolling up and down so much. But we have Vicerug here, who just comes out today. The Vanguard skill is Soul Blast 2, so I feel like you can make a decent argument for using this Soul Fronts in this deck, but I feel like it probably plays a different type of trigger. And then Eglima, who I have to rename in this tier list square, but I've seen lists that actually play these Soul Fronts for this because you don't really care about the shield. This is a very aggressive deck, so getting the extra resources is good. With that said, we'll move on to Stoichia here. Where I'd like to make some changes. I'd like to put Flagberg and Cristianos down here. I feel like both of these decks rather use draws, both by the nature of what they do and just because Cristianos isn't suffering for soul per se. It just would be nice. Originally I had the thought of using it, but I think I'd rather just stick to my build that uses draw because this deck just does not plus. And Flagberg is usually, the Vanguard is usually the last attack that goes through, so fronts are probably not going to see any play in this deck, right? I feel like all of these stay the same. One that I forgot to mention before was Zorga, that you guys mentioned in the comments. Yeah, I do think Zorga does benefit from these fronts here, especially because it can actually recur them. So getting some extra soul in Zorga sounds pretty good. Whether it's, Divine Zorga or Mass Zorga or some combination, I feel like either of them can use some soul. Station is a new deck for Stoichia that is actually not using the Soul Fronts. I've looked at a bunch of lists because it's very popular right now, and I haven't seen a single one that uses Soul Fronts. Maybe like one but I don't think you'll need it for this deck. And personally, from what I know about this deck, I don't think you'll. Same thing with Magnolia Patriarch. I don't think you need it because you either want to play a different type of trigger, or just the sheer fact that you can get souls so many different ways in this deck that it's kind of unnecessary. I accidentally have a mark on the screen there. There we go. Sorry that that's been there the whole time. Then Aggro Sirens is something that I wasn't too familiar with last time, but I feel like you can make a good argument of playing the Soul Fronts in that deck. But that does it for Stoichia. And then finally we can move on to our featured presentation here for Lyrical Monestario. So once again, we have here two tiers, one for the actual nation, which implies that it would be a good option to play the Soul Fronts in this deck, and then which means you could maybe play it, but it's probably not that important. And if it's not here at all, then you probably don't want the Soul Fronts for this deck. So in doing this video, I actually realized that apparently I don't know Lyrical Monestario as well as I thought I did, which is a bit unfortunate because I like to consider myself a Dark States player and then a Lyrical player almost close to second, right? But apparently that's not the case. But I did a little bit of research for this, and for Sienna is a deck that I've been playing around with quite a bit. You definitely want to play these Soul Fronts for this just because of the fact that this deck, in the early stages, you can use that to guard a Ghost of Soul, and later on you can use that soul for other things. But there are also cards that specifically say that you need to Soul Blast out a trigger, so that's an easy way to get them in. Also, you tend to not get the shield power up from the fronts with Sienna because you put a trigger into Soul to get 15k, not 20k, for example. So it might not really matter if you have the fronts, but at the same time, you could play draws, right? Because that's the kind of thing you can play draws that are 10k shield, but she turns them into 15k shield. So that's kind of what you do with Sienna. And crits are really important, right? So it's kind of like a toss-up, but I feel like a deck needs a lot of souls, so I would say it's a really good inclusion. Ulti Rosa, I looked through, and like she does have quite a couple cards that use soul right now, but she also has a couple of cards that give her soul. So I feel like I'm gonna put this here in M. Wallista, I feel like before used to use we used to use soul, but she used to be able to maintain it pretty well. But it wasn't until the later stages that maybe you started running out of soul. But I don't think you really need to use that. But Throka can play this just for the sake of playing it because it's a Highlander deck. Lishafel, I feel like could make use of this, but it's probably better to play something else like draws or maybe the shield fronts for the shields. But I guess you can make an argument for this because this deck does need 6 soul for its divine skills, so going second that might help you, but it's pretty easy for it to hit its soul requirement. So yeah. Flam Glam doesn't really need this at all. Medial does need this because its Restander and the Vanguard skill can end up costing you 3 soul in an entire turn, so you definitely want to play the soul front in this deck. Hazard was one that I had to take a look at, and I'm gonna say I guess yes, because of the sheer fact that ironically, I think Hazard can power up the front because I think she powers up cards. I don't know if she specifically says it has to be a specific number or if it has to be lower than the normal threshold, but either way, this deck does use quite a bit of soul, so I feel like it would be a good case to use this in, but I think I'd probably put it here because I think you'd probably play draws or something else. Then we have ourselves Marlene, who I think is an auto-include to use these soul fronts. She has a lot of cards herself that use soul. But then also you, by the nature of the deck, because of how generic it is, you can make use of Yuika, Bashblan, a bunch of other cards that actually end up using soul. So I think it would be beneficial to use that. Kind of the same thing with Kairi here. I'm gonna have to, I guess, put this here because I've seen some lists from Japan and they're playing all different types of things. I've seen draws, I've seen normal fronts, I've seen soul fronts. I personally use the soul fronts in Kairi, but I guess it can go either way again, just because of the nature of the deck. It's kind of generic in how it works. Ella Steel, I feel like is sort of like an but like not really, because it does have some cards that use soul, and it kind of depends on how you build the deck. But it is a rewriting Vanguard, so you can kind of get soul that way. You kind of want to soul blast that card anyways. And Labrador, I feel like can make good use of it, just because of the sheer fact that you do have a way to get soul by constantly soul charging with Celtic, I think it is. No, not Celtic is the grade 2, right? Clear? Is that the grade 1? No, I think that's the Vert card. Rosa? So yeah, sometimes you'd have some soul issues with this, and the only way to get that is a soul charge, but then of course it's just blindly soul charging. So that might help out the deck a bit. Kyoka is a deck where you can maybe consider it because it does end up using a lot of soul. It's somewhat similar to Medio where you can do 3 soul per turn, but unlike Medio, she has a lot more ways to get cards back into soul. And she also has an alternate cost where she doesn't have to use soul for the Vanguard swing. And I feel like you probably want the shield more, but I can maybe see an argument for it. Artisalia is kind of ironically in the case with these two where people are just playing it really with a lot of generics right now. But I've seen most lists that don't use Soul Front, and I've seen some that do, so I'm going to include that here for now. Vert, I feel like does not need it. Fortia, I feel like can do without it as well. Lethia, I feel like can do without it. Chris Rain, I feel like can also do without it, but kind of in the same vein as Patrolka. You can, if you want to play Highlander triggers, I guess you can do that, right? But at the same time, you don't really want to play that trigger out. And she doesn't really use Soul, so maybe I'll change it around. Maybe we'll take her out. Florasia literally can't play it because she can't guard with it after she rides. Michu has enough Soul. Lutetia has her own way to get Soul, doesn't need triggers in Soul specifically. Coral doesn't really have any ways to use her Soul aside from specific Coral units, and that's what she wants in Soul, so getting a trigger in there is kind of whatever. Sagita doesn't really use Soul, she uses more counterblasts. Clarissa doesn't really use Soul. Lornal has ways to fill up her Soul, actually. Herminia literally wants no Soul, so I don't think that's going to work out for her. And then Fennel here would rather probably use the Shield Fronts because she has to play 16 orders in her deck, so I don't think she really needs a Soul, especially considering none of her cards really use Soul, aside from Stegria. Then we have Shermont, who, like, you can almost, I want to say, make an argument for, but I really don't think it's necessary. Same thing with Pacifica here. So with that, I can go ahead and delete this entire row, and this is going to be the final list of which decks, you know, can consider playing these Soul Fronts for Dragon Empire, Dark States, Keter, Brandt Gate, Stoichia, and Lyrical Monestario. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If I got some of these right, if my opinions are correct. More so the second one than the first part, right? Till next time, I hope you guys have really good pulls when you try to pull for this set. Hope you take care of yourselves and each other. Play Vanguard and have yourselves a damn good one.